Chip's the author of numerous books. His most recent one is Wisdom at Work. He also wrote Emotional Equations and Peak. I'm sure many of you have heard of the books or read the books. He started Joie de Vivre Hotels when he was 26 years old, which we can ask him about. He's been through many downturns and upturns and sideways turns and reverse turns. And he's also been on the boards of Esalen Institute and Burning Man and worked with teams and leaders of all different kinds. He was also an executive and head of global hospitality at Airbnb for many years, and has since kind of shifted his focus on modern elders, which we can talk about at some point in our interview. But we also really want to hear his thoughts on how do we navigate in downturns? What are some of the questions we need to be asking? What are some really practical things that we can begin to do as we face uncertainty as entrepreneurs, as business leaders? There will be a time, as I mentioned before, to ask questions at the end. So you can raise your hand and we'll bring you in to ask a question. So without further ado, let me just find you, Chip.
I'm here.
You are spotlighted. So welcome, Chip.
There we go. Hey, great to be with you, Soren, and to the Wisdom 2.0 community. Soren, thank you. This is the first time you've ever had less hair than me. No, I'm really honored to be with you to kick this off, and have felt such an affinity to you and your community, and have the great opportunity to be on stage multiple times. So let's jump in.
All right. So I think, one of the big things, Chip, and you feel free to take this in different directions. So I'm going to ask a question, and if you don't like the question, you can take it in a different direction.
I can be a politician.
I think one of the things that's really up for me right now is as you look at the economy and the uncertainty of the economy, I've never experienced this in my life. I don't think if we look at the history of our nation and our globe, something as unprecedented as this is impacting every sector, and of course some sectors more than others. But I wonder if you could start by kind of sharing your own experience about how you've worked with uncertainty and unknown as a business leader and as a person, and how do you kind of handle that and work with that so that you can kind of make the best decisions out of as conscious or mindful place as possible, rather than out of fear or out of anxiety. So I always thought we would just start with this whole kind of realm of living in a world of uncertainty, and what does it mean for a business leader and entrepreneur when the world is really hard to make, much less a 3-year plan, but like a 2-month plan or a 6-month.
How about a 3-minute plan?
3-minute plan.
Well, so let me start by saying I wrote a blog post. I have a blog called Wisdom Well that's on the Modern Elder Academy website, and I write a daily blog. And I wrote a blog recently on the subject. It posted last week, and it was, who invited uncertainty to dinner? And the whole premise was like, most of us aren't really fond of uncertainty. Uncertainty actually confuses us, makes us feel dumb, takes up a lot of space at the table. And you'd rather welcome them out of your home.
Yeah.
So there's really two components that, when I wrote my book, Emotional Equations, I was lucky enough to go study with all kinds of famous psychologists and social psychologists on 18 different emotions, one of them being anxiety. And what I found was that 98% of anxiety tends to come from uncertainty and powerlessness. And instead of an equation of uncertainty plus powerlessness, actually there's a time sign, which means that when you have both uncertainty and powerlessness, it actually is combustible. So on a personal level, what I would just say for myself and for everybody listening or watching, the first question to ask yourself, there's something that I created called the anxiety balance sheet. And the premise of the anxiety balance sheet is sometimes anxiety is something that is floating in your life, and what you need to do is wrestle it down to understand what the anxiety is about. So the anxiety balance sheet goes like this. You create a column. Think of the thing that's making you anxious. Let's say it's, I'm going to get laid off from my job. Okay. One column is under uncertainty, is what do you know? And then the second column is what do you not know? Just make those lists. We're not going to do it right now, but this is something you can do. If you Google Chip Conley anxiety balance sheet, you'll see it out there. And then the other part of the balance sheet is what do you relates to the powerlessness piece. What can you influence, and what are you powerless over?
Mhm.
And when you spend some time taking this thing that you're anxious about and turning it into these two pieces, uncertainty and powerlessness, it helps you to realize that you actually have more certainty or knowledge about things than you thought you did. But there's one or two things that are just totally messing with your brain. Similarly with the powerlessness, there are things you can influence. There's things you can choose to do. If you think you're going to get laid off, one of your choices is quit. That actually means you don't have to worry. But that's not very practical for most of us because we can't afford to financially, or we don't know what's next. One of the things we really focus on quite deeply down here at the Modern Elder Academy is liminality. To be liminal is to be in the second phase of the rite of passage. Rite of passage.
Liminal.
Yeah, liminal. You have 3 stages.
Oh, limit things.
It's liminal to be in transition. So like being in limbo.
Mhm.
And we don't like being in limbo, especially in adulthood. In adulthood, when we were children, we sort of felt like being in limbo, no one was self-conscious about moving from crawling to walking. You
Mhm.
didn't want to do it in your own room, so no one was going to see you.
Mhm.
But as we're adults, we don't like to look awkward or uncertain or sort of, in a state of limbo.
Mhm.
So long story short is I would just say, think about anxiety as being probably the predominant emotion in the world today.
Mhm.
Know that there may be some things that you can be certain about or have some level of certainty about. If it was your job, you could literally go to your boss and say, what's the likelihood I'm going to actually be laid off? Now,
Mhm.
that's a hard question to ask because it actually takes something that's uncertain and makes it more certain, and you may not like the answer.
Right.
But often what's been studied, on social science has shown people would prefer to hear the wrong answer or the bad answer than to actually be uncertain.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's one piece. And then the powerlessness piece is like, you know what? Figure out what you can influence. Now let me move this to the leader side of things. As a leader, your job is to be the emotional thermostat of those you lead. What does that mean? So a thermometer actually just takes the temperature. A thermostat sets the climate. So if you're leading, and this could be, for some of you are saying, well, I'm not a leader. Well, maybe you are. Maybe you have a family of an extended family of 7 or 8 people. And in many ways, you're a leader in that family. And so you are the emotional thermostat for that group. You're the emotional thermostat for a group of friends you might have. You might have a department in your company where there are 5 of you, and you could be the leader in that group. So to be the emotional thermostat does not mean that you just put on the happy face and pretend that everything's going right. It absolutely means you need to be a vulnerable visionary. That's what I call it.
Mm.
Um, the vulnerability opens people up and allows people to know that you're being real with them. Because at the end of the day, what people want from their leaders is trust. They want to be able to trust their leaders and feel like their leaders are authentic.
Mhm.
But if all you're doing is the vulnerability piece, and there's potentially a perception of a lack of confidence, then you've only gotten half the equation. The other part of it is help people to see the North Star, help them to see the good news,
Mhm.
create what I call the momentum of victory, point to some things that are some good news in the organization, progress that's being made. Let me use a quick example and then we could go to the next question. But the quick example I used is something we did in the dot-com bust in 9/11. My company, Joie de Vivre, was the largest independent hotelier in the San Francisco Bay Area at that time. And the Bay Area just got pummeled for about a 4-year period. The thing we could do that gave people a sense of powerfulness in our hotels and our restaurants and our spas was we would bring in a couple of loyal customers who loved let's say one of our hotels. And once a month when we had a staff meeting, we would get one of our loyal customers to give a 5-minute testimonial about why they love that hotel. And we
Mm.
would ask the customer, please at least cite 2 or 3 people in the audience, employees
Mhm.
who you love and why you love them. And what is it that gives you the sense that this is like your family? So by doing that, it didn't cost us anything as a company. It allowed our employees to see that they are powerful. that that extra smile that they gave to someone had a profound impact on a hotel guest who was having a bad day. It also helps people to understand, wow, maybe we're making progress here, because in a pandemic, everything is falling apart, and so people tend to move into that survival mode where they're full of fear. So
Mhm.
long story short is I wrote a lot about this in my book, Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow, as well as emotional equations. But the bottom line here is our emotions are as contagious as a virus.
Mhm.
And we don't often think about that. And the more senior you are in an organization or in a group, the more contagious you are because you really are that emotional thermostat.
Yeah.
So just know that, that level of both knowledge and transparency can
Mhm.
have a huge impact on helping other people feel a little bit more emotionally fluent and safe.
Right. Because if you feel uncomfortable, they're going to feel uncomfortable because they're just going to pick up your own levels of anxiety. Are there things that you do that help you feel like you're embodying that authenticity as a leader and that vulnerability? Or is it more just an intention? If you have the intention, it kind of naturally comes forth, or are there certain kind of skill sets that you've learned over the years? It's like, wow, when I do X or Y, it kind of grounds me in a certain way.
I mean, some of it's habits. Like one of the things that's very true in a downturn is people feel unrecognized and unappreciated.
Mhm.
So you could literally create a habit as a leader that twice a day, I will do a private recognition to somebody, on the team to say thank you to them about something quite specific that they did, that was meaningful. And if I missed my Monday 2, I have to do 4 on Tuesday.
Mhm.
And that was something I would do in a downturn, is to just be a reminder that, my God, people need to feel appreciated. They need to feel recognized. They need to we're very good often in organizations of catching people doing things wrong, but
Mhm.
we're not so good at catching people doing things right.
Mhm.
And in a downturn, we tend to focus on what's going wrong. So
Mhm.
therefore, we are not actually applauding people who are doing things right.
Right, right, right.
So I would just say that. I'd say, what are the 5 adjectives that you want to define the culture of this organization 2 years from now?
Mhm.
Because when you're in a downturn, people tend to get focused on the here and now, which is
Mhm.
fine. And from a meditative place, that's great. But from a culture place, it means we are just sometimes getting into a war mentality of we're at war right now.
Mhm.
And that kind of what, if you look out 2 years from now and you say, here are the 5 adjectives I want this company to be defined by. And then
Mhm.
you ask yourself today, what are the behaviors, practices, and ways of creating ritual even within the organization that can help us move toward those 5 adjectives?
That's beautiful. And so one of the things that we were talking about ahead of time was we wanted to talk about kind of the emotional side and and that side, and we also wanted to make sure we touch on some of the practical side. So I was wondering maybe if we could kind of go there now, because I know that along with being kind of a mindfulness practitioner and a meditation person and person into all kinds of yoga and healing things, you're also a very practical business person. And so I was curious, what on kind of the practical side would you feel like is really important for us to know, or to just think about, or to ask, or to attend to as we look at navigating this time?
Sure. And I think you'll like this first one because this goes back 33 years. I've been doing this for 33 years.
Mhm.
I did it when I started my company when I was 26, Joie de Vivre, and I ran that company as CEO for 24 years.
Now,
What
what can I just jump in real quick? You're 26 years old and you said, I'm going to start a hotel chain.
Well, I
Is
said
LSD involved? Is psychedelic?
I'm gonna buy a no-tell motel in the Tenderloin for very little money because it was in bankruptcy, and I am gonna see if I have the capacity to be not just a hotelier but a motelier. And I took away the hourly rates. So, but to be honest, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I mean, yes, I
Yeah.
had some business background, and yes, I was I went to Stanford undergrad. I went to Stanford Business School and graduated at age 23. So I was sort of a type A, and went to work in a real estate development company. But I wanted to do something
Okay.
felt like it was serving the world. I
Got
called
it.
the company Joie de Vivre, which means joy of life. That was our mission. But after about 3 weeks of being CEO of this company in an industry I had no background in, I realized how clueless I was.
Yeah.
And so I took a personal journal, one of my journals that hadn't been touched yet. So it was, we all have one of those in the back recesses of, our bookshelves. Um, and I called it the Wisdom Book. I
Wow.
wrote the Wisdom Book on the cover of it.
Yeah.
And my practice was that every weekend I would make a list. Actually, it wasn't even a list. It was a bullet points of my key lessons of that week. What are the lessons that I learned? What happened? Often in a week that was a really rough week, there were a lot more lessons. And what was interesting about that process of sort of keeping tabs and in essence metabolizing what it is that I learned that week, I went into the next week feeling a little bit wiser, a little bit
Mhm.
more like I had cultivated and harvested some wisdom. And I'm a huge fan of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if you distilled that book down into a singular equation, and I did that on the night I died. I died at age 47 and was shocked back to life 9 times, and was in a hospital in emergency room ICU in a hospital in St. Louis after having, basically died on stage after giving a speech.
Wow.
Um, that night in the hospital, I took that book, Man's Search for Meaning, and I just turned it into an equation. Despair equals suffering minus meaning. So if suffering is sort of an ever
Spirit
present,
equals suffering minus me.
despair equals suffering
Despair.
minus meaning.
Okay.
So if suffering is a bit of a constant in life, if you're a Buddhist, certainly
Mhm.
it's the first noble truth of Buddhism. But in a pandemic, I promise you it's a constant. It's there. So if it's a constant, then, but despair and meaning are variables. What happens in the math here is that if you actually increase the meaning, you decrease the despair. Let me just use an example. If 8 equals 10 minus 2, 8 is despair, 2 is meaning, and suffering is 10. If you can actually increase the meaning to 6,
Mhm.
the despair drops to 4,
Mhm.
and the suffering is still at 10. So what does that mean? Well, that means that my wisdom book that actually I have been using now, and I now have 8 volumes of them. That thing I've been using just for myself for 33 years. When I'm going through a difficult time, trying to make sense of what I learned that week in
Mhm.
real time and helping myself feel like that lesson is going to actually serve me in the future.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
going to give me hope and a sense of meaning,
Mhm.
brought down my despair.
Wow.
And so we ultimately use that equation in my company with our
Mhm.
leaders, and as a way to help them create some more emotional fluency for the 3,500 employees we ultimately have in that company.
Mhm.
So I would just say that's a practical way to help yourself or others.
Yeah.
I would say another thing is the question I love to ask, especially direct reports, but you could ask it to your children, you could ask it to your husband, wife, spouse, whomever, is how can I support you to do the best work of your life or to live the best life? How
Mhm.
can I support you? I'm going to do it in the context of maybe a direct report at work right now.
Mhm.
How could I support you to do the best work of your life here at Airbnb, let's
Mhm.
say, because I was at Airbnb for 7.5 years, 4 years full time. And so that's a question I would ask. And part of the reason that question is so beautiful is it number one says that your boss wants to support you, which a
Mhm.
lot of people don't believe.
Yeah.
Secondly, it says, I want you to stretch. I want you to have I want you to do the best work of your life here, which may feel really hard in a difficult and uncertain time.
Yeah.
But it's giving some hope that, like, okay, what I think many people have seen, and what I can say personally, is that I learned my greatest lessons and the things I tend to be most proud of in my life, in my work life, and even in my personal life, are when I was going through the most difficult times.
Wow.
And so, how can I support you to do the best work of your life here at Airbnb or the Modern Elder Academy? The last piece of that question that's really valuable is it's actually giving agency to the other person. It's saying, I may be your boss, I may be your father, I may be whatever, but you tell me,
Mm-hmm.
what is it that you need to do the best work of your life? Or what is it that you need to live your best life? And how can I support you? How can we have a conversation in which I might be able to unlock some of your wisdom or some of your creativity or some of your sense that you're naturally feeling like a victim in the relationship with me and the company.
Yeah.
I'm giving you agency.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're co-collaborating with them on the question versus
That's
thinking
right.
that it all has to come from you.
Right. Exactly.
And do you have a sense, Chip, as you kind of look ahead and in this kind of uncertain times? I know you had 5 questions that you put out on your blog recently to ask yourself. I don't know if we want to go through each question.
Well,
But
yeah.
is there a particular? I mean, some people are like, should I get out of this business and go into that business, right? Like,
Right.
if you do large events, like some of us do, should we just forget about large events and go into a different business? How do you help assess those kind of questions about direction and about where it makes sense to kind of put one's life force and one's skill sets, and both in terms of what gives you value, but also in
Yeah.
terms of what makes sense to a changing economy that might not be what it was a few months ago?
Well, I would start with getting clear on what's your essence, like what's the differentiator in you. And if it's for your company, the question I would pose is, what business are you in? And frankly, if you and I, Soren, and you and I went through this, what
Yeah.
I would do is I would say to you, Soren, what business are you in with Wisdom 2.0? And then you say, well, we're in the, and you'd fill in the blank. And it typically would be sort of the way most people would describe it. When we did this at Airbnb, we said we were in the home sharing business.
Mhm.
But you would answer it, and then I would say back to you, thank you, Soren, but I'm going to ask you the question again. What business are you in? And the second time, you can't answer the same way twice. And we'd go
Mhm.
through this exercise
Right.
5 times. And by the time we get to the 5th answer that you come up with, you have actually potentially done an archaeological dig to
Mhm.
help you
Mhm.
understand the essence of what differentiates your business. In the case of Airbnb, when we did this exercise a month after I joined the company, we learned that we were in the belong anywhere business. At Joie de Vivre, my boutique hotel company, we were in the identity refreshment business. At Modern Elder Care Academy, we're in the aging is aspirational business.
Mhm.
But you could use this for yourself. Here's how you do it for yourself. Let's say you're a consultant. Let's say you're a consultant and you have no business right now, or you're a freelancer in some way. And you're just like, oh my God, all my business went away. Well, do this with a friend. And instead of asking what business you're in, you could ask that, but you could ask instead, it's like, what mastery do you offer?
Mhm.
And then do the repeating question for what mastery do you offer? Because what actually I found a few years ago when someone did that with me is that I found that I was, at the end of the day, my mastery was being a social alchemist. Now, I had never thought of myself as a social alchemist, but underneath all of the things that I did as a leader and as a seeker, there was this sense of I really like to bring people together and create some kind of social alchemy. Um, and so that helped me to use as a lens moving forward, because now let's get to the practical side. Okay, I'm a social alchemist, but I don't have any clients. So the question I would ask is this, is, the question we tend to ask when we're really at the bottom of Maslow's pyramid is like, how do I get my basic needs met?
Mhm.
But the question that we really should ask, especially if we're in the service business of serving someone else, or if we're any kind of freelancer or consultant, is what problem am I trying to solve for my customer?
Mhm.
What customer? So the question I would ask, if I got to the place right now, I had no business
Mhm.
and I knew I was a social alchemist, I would ask myself, for whom in the world right now, especially in the networks that I have, who could use a little bit of social alchemy? How
Mhm.
could social alchemy, and so for those who don't know what the term means, it's not a normal term. It basically means somebody who actually understands the right mixture of how you bring people together, and in a group together, they do something bigger or have more of a transformational experience or have more enjoyment.
Mhm.
Um, so now, of course, in a period where we are in social distancing, your social alchemy may have to be, how do I become an innovator of social alchemy online?
Mhm.
What's a way to do, how
Mhm.
could I get a group of people together, 12 people, and we're going to meet once a week. And instead of being able to do it in person, we're 12 people once a week. I'm going to lead the group. And every morning at 8 a.m. it starts, and each person gets a delivery of their favorite drink,
Mhm.
because I know what your favorite drink is because we did a little survey, and you get your favorite drink. At the end of the day, now this is off a few months, because at the end of the day, um, a massage therapist shows up at your door. Now, right now, you wouldn't want that probably because we're not quite there yet. But a massage therapist shows up with a massage table, and all 12 of you get a massage. And then after the massage, you all have
Where did these ideas come from, Jeff?
they just come
Right.
from the head. And then
Yeah.
after that, at dinner, you have a dinner as a group. Each of you is cooking together. So you each have your, and you're all cooking the same recipe. You're all going to eat it. And then you have a dinner where you're eating the same dinner, each of you having cooked it yourself.
Mhm.
And you ask, each person asks a provocative question to the group that
Mm.
actually, and with a grand total of no more than 10 minutes per question, which gives you 2 hours.
Mhm.
That is how you could be a social alchemist in
Right.
an era where social distancing is the norm.
Right. Beautiful. But you first have to discover or inquire as to what is that particular gift that is you, or that makes up you,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Then how can that be expressed?
And doing that with a friend who knows you moderately well helps, because they're going to call you on things. And don't think that just the first time you do it, when you get to your fifth answer, it's going to be the perfect answer. It may not be until a few weeks later, and it may be just in the midst of taking a shower that you said, "Oh God, that's actually what I am." So
Right. And you might have already answered this, and then if you have a question, please, on the participants, you click that, you can raise your hand at the bottom. What is it that what is it that you know now that you really wished you would have known when you were just starting business? So let's say that was 22, you
that's
think you graduated. You've
that,
probably been asked this before, but I've never heard you answer this. So I
well,
would love to know, looking back, like, this piece of information, I learned it later, but it might have reduced a certain amount of suffering had it been known earlier, if it could have
well,
been.
I would say it's a funny question you ask, because I'm going to actually follow this up with a question to the group. This is a question that they could consider themselves. I would say the number one thing I had to learn pretty quickly was to not take personally the ups and downs of my business. I'll never forget.
Mhm.
So we created 52 boutique hotels in my company, which made us the second largest boutique hotelier in the U.S. But all of them are in California. And I'll
Mm.
never forget the first hotel, which is called the Phoenix. I
Yeah, I
still
know.
own it.
Yeah,
I still
yeah.
own it like 33, 34 years later. Rock and roll motel in the Tenderloin. Um, Someone asked me at a party, so like this is about a year or two after the hotel had started, and I was 27, 28. So Chip, how you doing? And I immediately answered by saying, "Oh, the Phoenix is really doing well. I mean,
Wow.
we're starting to get a lot of bands, and we
Yeah.
got some famous musicians staying there, and it's amazing." And da, da, da. And she pulled me aside, because there were other people there, and like pulled me aside 5 minutes later, and she said, "Do you realize that actually when you answered that question, you didn't tell me how you're doing, you told me how your business is doing.
Yeah.
You're going to have to learn how to disconnect your sense of self-esteem with the ups or downs of your business."
Yeah.
And so, the Rudyard Kipling poem about, I think it's called "If," is a beautiful one, because the truth is that the triumphs or the tribulations are going to be there, but if you let your own sense of self-worth be defined by the success or failure of your business,
Mhm.
you will have the experience that 5 of my friends had during the Great Recession 10 years ago. I had 5 friends. None of them knew each other, so it was nothing done sort of in a contagious way. But 5 separate friends, 3 of them entrepreneurs, commit suicide. All men
Wow.
between 42 and 52, um, because their sense of self-esteem was way too attached to their
Wow.
career or their work or their entrepreneurship.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so, what we know is that there's an epidemic in suicides before
Yeah.
before COVID, and that people 45 to 64 are 50% more likely to commit suicide today than 20 years ago. So there's a lot we need to learn on that. The question I will ask to you, your community, our community, is the following. It's sort of a similar question, and it's this. I think it's a beautiful question. I'm sorry. I like this question so much. What do you know now that you wish you'd known 10 years ago? Sort of similar to your question, sorry.
More immediate.
But here's what I would take it. Based upon what do you know now that you wish you know 10 years ago, what can you learn today that will serve you 10 years from now?
Mm.
So for example, I'm 59 years old and I'm learning Spanish for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Mexico most of the time. I plan to live here a long time. Yes, it's hard to learn a new language in my late 50s, but it's a lot worse 10 years from now if I didn't try. Mm-hmm. Similarly, I'm learning how to surf. I'm not very good at it.
I've seen you surf, yes.
Yeah, yes, you have actually. And you know I'm not very good at it. So, but, and of the two, frankly, Spanish is going to serve me a lot better at age 69 than surfing will. But what's predicated on both of those in terms of sort of a seize the day moment, the first one about Spanish is like 10 years from now, I will regret if I didn't really put my energy into it now. The second one is like, there's certain things I can only do now that I probably can't do 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Like it's not even available. And not to say that someone couldn't start at 69. We have had people here at the Modern Elder Academy in their 70s learn to surf for the first time. That's crazy. But yeah, this is a better time to do it now than 10 years from now.
So just going back to the question, what do you know now that you wish you had known 10 years ago? And what can you do now that 10 years from now?
What could you learn now? What could you learn that would serve you 10 years from now?
Great. Wonderful. We got those. So if you have a question, I see Donna's raised her hand, so we'll bring in a question if we're good with that, Chip.
Sounds great.
And so Donna, I'm just going to highlight you. So you are here and unmuted, Donna.
Thank you. After John today, now you, it's great. Tonight, the Dalai Lama is giving a talk. So
I'm in good company.
I've had a great day.
Thank you, Donna.
And my question is, I sat in with Professor Lobsang Nege on a compassion in business and leadership seminar where there were people, international bankers and, people in the business community. And I feel so strongly that business has to be transparent. You get inundated with ads for everything on TV, and there's so much BS out there. And honesty and compassion and love in the business world. And I've lived places when in Berkeley and San Francisco in the 60s and on, when people were trying to practice those things and do business. And I'd love to see that again. Thank you.
So I guess your question is, how could we encourage more of that?
Yes.
So I'm a believer in conscious capitalism, but I'm more even a believer in karmic capitalism. And it's sort of something that I teach in the world. I once was profiled in an article in a magazine, and the headline was, "Here's your karmic capitalist." And I was like, okay, I'll take that on. So what is karmic capitalism? Karmic capitalism basically means what goes around comes around. And what I believe in the business world, and there's a ton of evidence now, and I go out and give lots of talks about this in business schools as well as in big companies and at conferences. The evidence is this, is if you create a great culture, a transparent culture, a culture of giving, a servant leadership culture where the more senior you are in leadership, the more you're there to serve those below you. You create that kind of great culture, it leads to engaged and enthusiastic employees. If they're enthusiastic, it tends to lead to loyal customers, which tends to then to lead to a profitable and a market share growth, which leads to a profitable and sustainable business. And then you invest back in culture. It's a virtuous circle. And we turned it into the shape of a heart. So to use your love analogy, we called it the joie de vivre heart. And we show every single one of our employees, from the bartenders to the housekeepers to the night auditors, would actually learn, this is our business model. You need to understand that what we believe is that what goes around comes around. So we, as the leaders, need to create a great culture. If we're not doing that, then that virtuous circle won't happen. So the good news, I would say, relative to when I first introduced that model 25 or 30 years ago, is that more and more companies now have adopted it, not just my model, but the idea of conscious capitalism. And this is the time when the rubber will hit the road, though, because in a pandemic and with the economy falling apart, let's see how people respond. Let's see how leaders respond. I was very proud that my mentee, Brian Chesky at Airbnb, who I've been mentoring for 7.5 years, when he had to lay off more than 25% of the employees in this company, and let's call it his controversial company because not everybody loves Airbnb, he did it in a way that was gracious, and he did it in a way that actually showed some of that karmic capitalism. So thank you for your question, Donna.
Gustavo. Let's see, you are here and unmuted. Where are you calling from?
Uruguay.
Uruguay.
Ah, a beautiful place.
Yeah. And thank you, Soren, and thank you, Chip, for being here with us today. I have a very straightforward question to you, Chip. I am a consultant, and I am working with some hotels. And I would like to have an idea of what you think is the future of the hospitality business. Because, most of the hotels in Uruguay, in Montevideo, are closed, okay?
Yeah.
And they really don't know how they are going to open. What are the conditions and this? And so just a glimpse of what you think.
Yeah, a glimpse of what I think. Well, I've been through, went through the dot-com bust and 9/11 and then through the Great Recession. And I said, oh, I've been through 2 once-in-a-lifetime downturns in the same decade, but I had no idea 10 years later this was coming along. I still own 9 hotels. I still own 12 hospitality businesses, a restaurant, a spa, and then the Modern Elder Academy as well. So I get it. I'm with you. My hotels are closed as well. Here's my perspective on it. I think in the long run, I think that there's some bamboo shoots coming out of this that are actually pretty positive for travel. What we know for sure is there's a lot of pent-up demand for travel, and people are talking about that. So that's good, but that's not, that doesn't pay the bills today. What is going to come back fastest is anything related to family-related celebrations or small friend group events. So what does that mean? Someone's having their 70th birthday party and they don't want to put it off. And it's happening in August, and they're just going to have it. They may not have 100 people to it. They may have 25 people to it. And they may have it in a hotel instead of it in their home because they decide they want to just like splurge a little bit because hotels are charging a lot less right now. So that'll happen. Zoom weddings are not a good thing. So weddings, and there's going to be a pent-up demand because there's a lot of weddings that had to get canceled this spring. And so weddings will come back. Family reunions will come back. Small corporate retreats will come back. Anything that's small, I have some confidence in. Our Modern Elder Academy has on average 18 people in a cohort. I think it'll come back relatively soon. What also will come back is transformational travel. People choosing to travel for the reason of creating some transformation in their life. Because one thing that has happened from this what I'm calling the Great Cessation, we had a Great Depression, the Great Recession, now we have Great Cessation, because everything's seized. So the cessation basically has forced people to be reflective. And for a lot of people who I know who are not necessarily very deep normally, they have been forced to have their emotions catch up with them and to get a little bit more reflective about their life. And as such, they're scratching their head and saying, I don't like my status quo. pre-COVID. So transformational travel, experiences that allow people to go and imagine how they can shift their life. I think that will come back. I think the idea of digital nomads. So you're familiar with digital nomads? We tended to think about digital nomads as millennials who are freelancers and can work from wherever they want to go. They spend a season in Bali, and then a season in Baja, and then a season in Austin, and a season in Boston, and or a season in Montevideo. So that has been a very niche industry. I know that industry, or that segment of people pretty well, because they live on Airbnb. Airbnb is not their home away from home, it's the home instead of home. That segment is going to grow, because more and more people are going to say, I can do my work remotely, and I don't want to live in suburbia. And my kids have moved out. I have an empty nester. Me and my partner have a 3-bedroom home. We don't need a 3-bedroom home in boring,
Careful.
Yes, in boring wherever, Pleasantville, United States. And I actually want to go and live part of the year in Montevideo. And I want to live part of the year in Mexico City. And I want to live part of the year in Cabo San Lucas, because I have Spanish roots, and I want to actually get in touch with those. But I also want to do it in relatively same time zone, because my company's office is in Chicago. And so I actually think that trend is going to grow a lot in the next 10 years. That doesn't help you today, but that will, thinking through how do you create weekly rates and monthly rates for people, and services that fit that person, makes sense. I could keep going on and on about this, but that's a few thoughts.
Great, thank you. Because another of the issues I'm managing is my son has one of the biggest travel agencies in Uruguay, and he's completely out of business right now.
Yeah.
And looking at what is happening with the airlines and all this, it's kind
listen,
of
I'm very sensitive to this.
tricky.
He may have to, some people are going to have to close down their business and start up again at some point in the future. But it's it depends on what kind of government funding support you get. It depends on how deep your pockets are. And here's the most important question to ask, which is an important question to ask anytime. If I didn't have to work for money, would I be doing this? If the answer is yes, and you have money in the bank, absolutely keep doing it. So, I'm gonna actually, Gustavo, let me just bring up another thing that I think can be relevant to everybody here. So imagine, this is something we do at the Modern Elder Academy. It talks about the relationship between money and what's your relationship with money? Let me pose this question. Imagine you went to couples counseling with money, because no doubt you have a long-term relationship with money. What would you say about money in couples counseling, and what would money say about you? And I think having that kind of intentional and conscious conversation with your relationship with money is exceptionally important at this time, because there are a lot of people I know who have lived a lifestyle that required them to make twice as much money as they really need to make if they lived the lifestyle that was more comfortable for them, but probably a little bit simpler.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Gustavo. Just gonna move. Milena, I hope I pronounced your name right. You can always correct me. So,
hello, Melina.
Melina, you're on. Welcome. Where are you calling from?
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Chip. I'm in Lake Tahoe currently.
Okay.
Yeah, a really nice place. Not exactly where Chip is, but good to see you, Chip.
Good to see you, Melina. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. I would like to go back to your type A entrepreneurial mindset that used to have. And where do you think that's going to go with what's currently happening with a lot of people?
Well, I think there are, thanks for the question. It's only in the last couple of years since I started this, world's first midlife wisdom school, the Modern Elder Academy, which is our campus, 4.5 acre campus, which you've been to here in Baja, that I came to this conclusion that I'd never heard before. And that is the following, that there are two ways of operating in the world. You can be in the attain mode or in the attune mode. And I've spent most of my life in the attain mode, which is type A, attain. In fact, I did that partly because it gave me self-esteem. So when you're in the attain mode, often afterwards, you have to atone for yourself. Attainment leads to atonement, partly because attainment is a full body contact sport. And you sort of are self-oriented, self-motivated, and frankly, sometimes selfish. When you're in the attune mode, you actually have to attune yourself and to the harmony of what's around you. Yoga is an attune sport, but I never liked it, or an attune exercise. I never liked it because I was staring at everybody else while I was trying to figure out if I was better or not, and I was always worse. And so surfing is an attune sport. When you're in the attune mode, you're at one. Attain leads to atone. Attune leads to at one. Now, that doesn't mean that you should just go and be only an attuner in life, because an attuner in life, generally speaking, is a little bit easier going, not so type A, is able to take in sensory inputs by being a first-class noticer of things around them. And that can be very valuable. And you can succeed and be very successful doing that. But there are times when being in the attain mode is, what you need to do. When you're running if you're in the Olympics and running the 100-meter dash, you better be in the attain mode. So just know that I think one of the key questions in life is attain and attune. And the other question that I ask myself a lot is, I think the first half of our life is about accumulating, and it's often ego driven. Your primary operating system is your ego. And the second half of your life, you actually are in the editing mode, and the primary operating system is your soul. And so how we help people in midlife, and I define midlife as 35 to 75, pretty wide swath. How we help people to learn how to shift from driving automatic to driving a stick shift, or vice versa, is the key. And we have very little in the way of schools and tools that help people to understand, how do I move from attain to attune? How do I move from ego to soul?
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So can you say, Chip, we just have a few minutes, when the Modern Elder Cat, how are you navigating your own cat business? And when were you thinking that you would open up? And again, it's smaller groups, right?
Yeah, smaller groups. Yeah, we're in a very remote area.
Do you have a plan?
Yeah, we do have a plan. Our current plan is our applications will reopen. So the website's just modernelderacademy.com or .org. And you'll see the Wisdom Well blog on there. So, you can go and sign up for that. You get a daily free email from me. So we're planning on reopening in mid-October with applications opening up around July 1. Okay. And the thing is, it's a social enterprise. I don't earn any money. I built the campus for free. Over 60% of the people who've actually come to the program, we've had 800 people from 24 countries. Over 60% have been on some form of scholarship we give them. Because wisdom is not, I don't think wisdom is taught, it's shared.
Yeah.
How do you create the crucible of a safe collection of people in a 7-day program, which is our typical program? How do you create the space for that collection of people to learn from each other? And I'll never forget when a social worker who's 62, full of purpose but no money, and a 45-year-old retired investment banker who was full of money but no purpose, kept going for a walk down the beach every day. And their wisdom that they got was out of the classroom, and it was shared. And they would never, if there hadn't been a scholarship program, that
Right.
would never have happened.
Right. And if there hadn't been a Modern Elder Academy, that also wouldn't happen. And the container for that.
That's right. And our hope is basically to create, just like Esalen, the Esalen Institute, became a catalyst for personal growth retreat centers around the world. I am hoping that the Modern Elder Academy can be a catalyst for midlife wisdom schools, or what we're starting to call not lifelong learning, but long life learning. Because if we're going to have more longevity, how do we understand how to navigate a
Yeah.
longer life?
Yeah. Both in terms of health, but also in terms of energy and purpose and contribution and
The
and
three
impact.
things are purpose, wellness, community, and the interstitial spaces between that are social wellness, generativity, which means giving back, which is I am what survives me, and having a sense of flourishing in life.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, we are at the hour, which is what I asked you to give us. And so I want to thank you, deep-hearted thanks. And I think what we'll do, which is we've been doing, is everybody can unmute themselves and we can go to gallery view and you can say goodbye in unmute yourself and you can say goodbye in any language you choose or anything you wish to share. So thanks for coming, friends.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Excellent.
Namaste.
Excellent. Thanks for the question on the money relationship.
Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tchau, obrigada.
Everyone.
So much.
Au revoir.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Shalom.
Bye.
Shalom.
Thanks,
Hi,
bye.
Soren.
Shalom.
Bye.
Shalom.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.